Nicholas, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me today. I was working on your introduction, and to be honest, I don't even know where to start from. So, you have so many things on your plate, and you have been around for such a long time. I will just go through the main highlights, let's say. Most people know you as the creator of ESLint. That actually, I've checked out the NPM stats. ESLint is downloaded now 70 million times per week, which is incredible. I mean, I don't remember any recent JavaScript project I have been involved with that didn't had ESLint as a dependency. You are almost 25 years of experience, maybe even more, working for companies such as Box, Yahoo, and many others. And you also authored and co-authored more than 17 books, the main topic being JavaScript. So a very impressive resume. Thank you very much for taking your time, and welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm always curious about the origin story of my guest. How did you started with programming? What led you to this path?
Yeah, so I think that it probably started with the first computer that we got as a family. And that was a laser computer, which was an Apple II compatible computer. Basically just an Apple knockoff at the time. And at some point, I got introduced to BASIC programming language. And my dad and I used to kind of fool around with it and just make little programs and just kind of see what happened. And I was hooked. I was, from that point on, I just kept thinking about what else can I program? What else can I make this computer do? And naturally, as a kid,
Games.
it started with games, just trying to make little games. Growing up on games like the Oregon Trail, where like, hey, what do you want to do now? Go and do this. Okay, this happens. And just making games that would do that, and just very simple, like listing out a bunch of questions and then what do you want to do after each one. And I just loved it and kept going after that point. And as the computers became more powerful, just started exploring other programming languages. When we got our first Windows computer, it was Visual Basic, because I thought, like, oh, I already know Basic. Like Visual Basic must be pretty similar. Of course, it wasn't similar at all.
Exactly.
But actually started making just desktop apps with Visual Basic. And way back when everybody was using America Online, I created like a little application that was a timer that could show you for, I don't know how many of your people in your audience ever used America Online, but very early on when you had dial-up modems,
Yep.
on America Online, there were the free areas and then there were the paid areas. And so the game was always, how can you get everything that you need to get done in the paid areas and then very quickly get back into the free areas. So I made this little desktop app that would just keep track of your time in the free areas and in the paid areas. And then when you signed out, it would just kind of give you a little report. And I actually released that as shareware, and some people paid me for it. And yeah, just couldn't stop after that point.
I know, I know. We have very similar stories because I also started with Basic and making games, and I hear
Nice.
this is a recurrent games and Basic games and Basic. It's a recurring theme. Fast forward to today. You recently wrote on your blog, and by the way, for the people who are listening this. I'm sharing the blog of Nicholas. An article named A Persona Based Approach to AI Assisted Software Development. So jumping directly from basic to the age of AI. And in this approach of described in the article, you mention a couple of roles, different LLMs that you are using, and different prompts that you are giving to those LLMs. I'm curious how this whole system evolved. How did you ended up building the prompts and choosing the appropriate LLMs to deliver the intended output?
So it was definitely took a little while to come up with the approach, but it was basically because I kept getting really frustrated at what I was getting out of the AI. It seemed like regardless of which model I was using, it seemed to me like they could get distracted in the middle of implementing something. So I would say, implement this button, and they would go in and put the button in, and they'd be like, oh, I noticed in here that there's also like this, so I'm just going to start changing that, and I'm just going to start changing that. And it might not ever really get back to the original thing that I wanted. And I'd keep waiting and waiting and waiting and just seeing like, okay, this is not the direction I want to go in. And after that happened a few times, I realized that I really needed to be more specific in what I was giving the model so that what I could get out would be what I actually wanted. But then I didn't want to have to type all that much detail. Like it seemed like there needed to be a way to type what I was typing previously and to have it extrapolate the rest of the detail out and just let me review it before going on. And so I saw Burke Holland on the Visual Studio YouTube channel had done a video on creating a product requirements document first. So just saying, I want to build this feature, like build out a product requirements document so that it had like actual user stories, the expectations, what the UI should be doing and stuff like that. So that got me started thinking in that direction. Like, okay, so if I put together a PRD first, that gets me like the functional requirements of what I want. I want a button here. When I click it, I want it to do this. But functional requirements are not the same as technical requirements. And so I would find going from a PRD and saying, okay, implement this feature, there was still like a lot of interpretation that was going on by the different models. And sometimes models would use that as like a starting point and then jump off into a bunch of stuff. Claude in particular was doing that a lot. Sometimes the model just didn't know how to interpret the functional requirements in the way that I wanted it to. And so it felt to me like there was a missing step between the PRD and then the actual implementation. And that's when I stopped and thought about how I actually build software. So for ESLint, if you want to propose a feature, the first thing that you do is you open an issue and you describe what you want ESLint to do. And assuming that we think that's a good idea, the next step is to produce an RFC, request for comment, which is essentially a technical specification. And in that, you're supposed to describe how you're going to approach solving the problem. So transforming those functional requirements into technical requirements. Like, where are you going to make the changes? What are the API changes? How is that going to affect the rest of the project? And then once the RFC is approved, then you can actually go and implement the change and submit a pull request with the code changes. And so I thought, what if I followed the same process with models that I did with real people on ESLint and just say, like, let's create a technical specification first and then have the model just follow that technical specification so I know exactly what it's going to do. I don't need to pay that close attention and be like, oh, stop. Like, that's not the direction I want it to go in. And coming back to which models to choose, That was a bit of trial and error.
I see.
Um, Part of it was which ones did I think could do the job, and then part of it is which ones are the cheapest to run.
Okay.
So, like, if you're using Visual Studio Code, GPT 4.1 and 4.0 are included. So it makes sense to use those as much as you can. And then all of the other models, are based on usage. You get charged credits or whatever they're doing at this point.
I see.
And so I wanted to leverage the GPTs as much as possible to get started. And so creating the PRD, I found that GPT 4.1 did a pretty good job most of the time. So there really wasn't much need to experiment with that. It's a fairly limited scope of what I'm asking it to do, creating the PRD. And when there's a limited scope, I don't like using Claude because it has a tendency to go off in a bunch of different directions.
Correct.
And I thought, you know what, like GPT, I like to think of as just like obedient. Like it's doing what I'm asking it to do and nothing else.
Claude goes beyond Call of Duty.
Yeah, yeah. Claude is like, it comes over your house and it's like, oh, I noticed your walls are painted like a dull gray. I think it would be great if they were painted blue, and just starts painting them. For the technical specification, though, I wasn't happy with the level of detail that I was getting out of GPT. And as usual, Claude was kind of going off and doing all kinds of things that I didn't want it to do. So I decided to give Gemini 2.5 Pro a try, because it's still, I mean, things change so quickly. I'm not sure if it still is rated as like the top programming model or not. But I just found the level of detail that Gemini could produce was way better than GPT, and it stayed on task better than Claude. And so for that part of the process, I decided that Gemini was the best fit for what I was trying to accomplish there, and well worth, going into the paid part of Visual Studio Code to get that done, because the results were so good. And the thing that even impressed me more about Gemini is I could have a full-on conversation about the technical decisions it was making. In fact, yesterday I had it working on this Pocket clone that I'm working on, and I asked it to create a spec to implement a queue system for fetching metadata. So if you add a new URL, that gets added to the queue, and then at some point that'll get pulled off the queue and the metadata will be fetched. And what I thought it would do was add the pulling from a queue mechanism into the edge function I already had. But what it actually did was designed a system where there was a separate edge function that was managing the queue and then calling my original edge function. And I was like, I don't know if I like that. And so I just started talking to it and saying, hey, why did you decide to do that instead of just pulling from the queue inside the existing edge function? And it just explained out to me, well, we want to have a separation of concerns here. I wanted to keep the existing edge function to be just fetching metadata and not have to worry about queues. And then this new edge function is the one that's going to manage the queue specifically. And that way it'll be easier to debug and easier to maintain going forward. And it's like, oh, actually, that makes a lot of sense.
When you are starting to be convinced by the AI.
Yeah, exactly. And being able to have that like back and forth discussion about the design, and to not have it just say, like Claude does sometimes, you're completely right. I should have done it the way that you are saying it should have been done. To actually have it stand its ground and say, like, no, this is the reason that I feel like this is the best choice, is what makes Gemini to me like really helpful at that phase of the process. And then once you have that technical spec, once again, really your two options are GPT or Claude. And if you don't want it going off and inventing additional steps, because I mean, I even tried putting in the tech spec like out of scope items, and Claude was still just kind of going off and doing things. Just went back to GPT 4.1, and I prefer 4.1 over 4.0 just because it's significantly faster. You can still use 4.0, and it does a pretty good job of just going through the tech spec and implementing each step and then letting you know when it's done. The only issue with 4.1 is that it has a tendency sometimes to want to just describe what to do instead of actually doing it. So I'm still actually like tweaking some of my prompts to avoid that, because it still happens way more often than I would like it to. But if I ever get too frustrated with that, then I just go back to 4.0, and 4.0 is pretty good at implementing it. But once everything is implemented, if something isn't working, that's typically when I go to Claude, because I think of Claude as a bit more creative than the other models are. Sometimes it's overly creative, and that's a problem. But I'll usually go with 3.5 to start, because that's the least ambitious of the model. It's a little more constrained. And most of the time, it can figure out the problem the first shot, where sometimes when I try to figure it out with GPT, it can take like several iterations of it, like trying something and then just kind of getting stuck, and then me saying, okay, like what about this? Then it goes back and tries again. But Claude seems to be able to debug things a lot more successfully than GPT. So that's the use case where I stick with Claude, but the other times try to stay with GPT 4.1 at this point. And then if I need that deep dive technical analysis, then Gemini.
I see. Super. Very interesting. Nice. And speaking of articles on your blog, you also recently published an article about a tool you create, Crosspost, which is actually something that I also wanted to make for myself, because it's a tool that allows you to post on social media without being distracted of everything that's going on. You just give the post and it will go on multiple social media accounts. And you also used for this MCP, the Model Context Protocol. Where do you see MCP going in the future, and what was your experience using it?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember that MCP is really new. So there's still a lot of weirdness going on. It is getting better and better as we go on, but it's very early, right? Like, so we're talking about like JavaScript 1.0 this point. So what it is now is not necessarily what it's going to end up being in the future. This is just really the foundation of where it's going to go. And at the moment, it's still pretty limited. There's plenty that you can do creating an MCP server. I mean, if you have any API at all, then you can create an MCP server to wrap it in and let people interact with your API with an LLM. But there's still a lot of like trial and error that you have to go through. So when I did the first version of the MCP server for Crosspost, it was just very mapped to the API I already had, which was basically cross-post this message across all platforms or post this message onto just one platform. And each of those were different tools in the MCP server. And then the LLM can discover tools based on what you say even if you don't tell it to use that tool. So I can just say cross-post this, and it will go through and look through the available tools to see what matches with that command, with that prompt. And so when I did my second iteration, I got a little more creative with what the tools were doing, and I separated them out into different phases of the process. Because what you can do is each tool has a description, and the description is actually instructions to the LLM about how to use that tool. And so you can say, before using this tool, like, use this other tool. And what I wanted to do was implement message shortening, so that if you wanted to cross-post something and it was too long for one of the services, you could have the model shorten it for you. In order to do that, I needed to add a tool that could calculate the length of the post based on the social media service you were using, because different services count like URLs as a different number of characters. I think like Blue Sky, for example, I think URLs count as like a maximum of 30 characters, maybe. And I think Twitter is like in the 20s, something like that. Similar with Mastodon. So you really have to be able to calculate the length to know if it's too long, because you can't just go by character count. And so I created a tool to calculate the length of a message based on the strategy. And then I created another tool that was basically just a prompt to tell the model to shorten the message by a certain number of characters. And so it now became this web of tools, so that when I said cross-post this, the cross-post tool told the model to check the message length first using the check message length tool. And then if any of them were too long, to shorten it using the shorten message tool, before finally using the post to social media tool to post the final messages. And so it's really this interesting paradigm where you need to think about what you want the model to do before using your tool and after using your tool, and include those instructions in the tool description itself. And we can do a lot of pretty cool stuff with that today. And I think up until, I don't know, a couple months ago, 3 months ago, most of this all had to be done with local MCP servers running on your own machine. And really, in the past month, the MCP clients have started to implement like OAuth authentication for remote MCP servers. So you can now, like, GitHub has an MCP server that you can log into with your GitHub account, and then you have access to like querying anything that you've done in GitHub, creating pull requests, opening issues, all kinds of stuff like that. Just pretty amazing. But some of the limits right now have to do with different types of interactions. Like, what I wanted to do with Crosspost is let you drag an image into the prompt and say, like, post this image. And you can't do that, because right now MCP doesn't have a way for the model to read the raw bytes of that image and then pass it to a tool. There's some, I think, obvious security concerns there with letting the model have direct access to a file. But that's one limitation. There is an open issue on GitHub about that. And so I'm sure that that's something that will be figured out in the future. Like, there was a point where they wouldn't let JavaScript read in files either because of security issues, but we figured that out. And then another area that some people are starting to explore is like being able to return specific UI components from a tool that could be displayed in the middle of the chat to let users interact a little bit easier. Now, if you're thinking of interaction patterns like, in WhatsApp, like being able to pay for something, stuff like that. I think that is all of that stuff that we're doing in these other messaging apps, I will eventually find their way into MCP.
I see. I see. By the way, I would recommend anyone who's interested in MCP to check out the project source on GitHub. I think it's a fantastic read in order to get started, and because it's not such a big project that cannot be understood by like going through it. So I think it's a perfect starting project for this.
Yeah.
Keeping the ball in the JavaScript and AI realm, how do you see JavaScript and LLM integration evolving in the long run? We have this tool set that's increasing. We have LangChain.js, we have Master AI, we have everything, all the cool stuff that the guys from Versal are doing with the AI SDK. But on the other side, up until now, Python is seen as like the default language when it comes to AI. On the other side, JavaScript is the language of the web builders. So how do you see these two coming together in the long run? Do you think in the future JavaScript will become a much more powerful tool in the AI integration space?
I do. I'm a big believer in Atwood's law, which is anything that can be written in JavaScript will eventually be written in JavaScript. And I know when I started seeing AI and Python initially, I was like, that's interesting, because I'm a little bit biased, but if I were going to start an AI toolkit, like I would definitely choose JavaScript to start. I think that Python and JavaScript are both fairly easy to understand and get started with. And I feel like the tooling around JavaScript is just a lot stronger than it is around Python. And I think as a result, there are going to be more and more people wanting to work with LLMs with JavaScript. And I think that's going to spur more tooling. And I think that at least JavaScript will pull even with Python when it comes to LLM development and interaction, and could potentially pull ahead primarily because of the tooling. I just feel like there is such a vibrant tooling ecosystem in JavaScript that's constantly growing and evolving and changing that I don't quite see on the Python side. And I think that gives a really big advantage to JavaScript when it comes to taking on any other type of task. Whether that is LLMs, whether that is Internet of Things. I think that tooling and developer experience ultimately drives adoption of languages for specific purposes. And I don't know that there's another language that has so much tooling around it and so many options around tooling as JavaScript.
I see. Very interesting. You have wrote quite a number of books, and I'm also interested in this topic of book writing. Many of them are technical books centered around JavaScript. Now with the AI being such a big thing, how do you see the future of technical books? What would you do different, or if you would start writing a technical book today, how would you approach it?
Yeah, I think that writing technical books has always been challenging because the speed at which technology changes is so fast. I remember when I was writing the second edition of Professional Ajax, which was like my third book, I think, or fourth. We were in the final editing stage, And we had done, all of the copy editing, all the technical editing. We verified everything was working in Internet Explorer. Everything was working in Firefox. And I had the manuscript that I was reviewing. That was like the final step before it would go to press. And as I was reviewing that, Google released Chrome for the first time. And so we had to do a literal like stop the presses and go back and reread the book and see all the places where we needed to test something in Chrome now. And that keeps happening. It was part of the reason why I stopped writing really big books, because the last version of professional JavaScript that I wrote was 900 pages.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And it took a really long time. And it was, as things were changing, going back and updating it, that after that, I was just like, you know what? This is not working anymore. There's no way you can have everything about JavaScript in one book and have it be as up to date as you need it to be. And so from that point forward, I tried focusing on smaller books that were just focused on specific things. So I had one book on ECMAScript 6 once that was finalized, because that was something that introduced a lot of changes that people needed to learn about.
Oh, yeah.
And it was going to take a while for everybody to get caught up. So I figured, well, if I just document everything that's in ES6, we can publish it. Like, that'll probably be useful for like 2 or 3 years before everybody knows that stuff and they are ready to move on to the next thing. And another one I did that I actually did before understanding ECMAScript 6 was Principles of Object-Oriented JavaScript, which was more about the concept of object orientation and prototypes in JavaScript than it was about anything else. And I thought that would be good for a while, but then ECMAScript 6 came out, and we don't really need to worry too much about prototypes anymore. I mean, eventually I'm going to rewrite that book, because I think that it still is an important topic that is standalone and kind of evergreen. I don't think there's going to be another fundamental change in the way we do objects and classes in JavaScript. But going forward, I decided to just do like very narrow focus. So I have an ebook that I self-published called Understanding JavaScript Promises. And it's just everything you could want to know about promises. That's it. Just a very small slice of JavaScript to focus on. And that is still changing and evolving, but slowly. Now, there's small changes that come each year. That makes it easy to keep up with.
Yeah.
And I think going forward, if you want to be writing technical books, it's important to think about the shelf life of what it is that you're writing, because things are changing so quickly. And I want to focus on content that is going to be good for like 3, 4, 5 years at least, because I don't want to be rewriting things every year. Like, that's a ton of work. And technical book writing does not create a ton of money. It doesn't pay very well.
Yeah, correct.
So continually doing that doesn't make a lot of sense. But writing things that have a chance of lasting for a few years that are very narrowly focused, I think it still makes sense, because as much as LLMs are going to be doing a lot of programming for us, like, we're still going to have to understand the code that was written, because we never want to end up in a situation where there's a problem, we can't find an LLM to solve the problem, and then we're stuck because we just don't know what's going on anymore.
Yeah.
That would be a worst case scenario. So I think that there's still going to be a market for these types of books that teach you more about concepts than about syntax.
I see.
Because LLMs are really good at figuring out syntax errors and type errors and stuff like that. they're not always so good at figuring out like why the structure isn't working or why the algorithm isn't working, especially across multiple files in a large project. And we're still going to need people who can read code and understand code, even if it's just for auditing what the LLM created, right? Because you don't want to have code going out into production that no human has ever laid eyes on before.
Correct.
Like,
Correct.
you just don't know what's going to be out there.
Correct. Fair enough. Fair enough. Um, Changing gears for a bit. I think it's pretty safe to say that you have a very longevous career, more than 25 years. Uh, what are the things you have discovered that work in order to have a longevous career as a software developer? How one is not, I don't know, like disappointed about the industry or burnout or tired of learning new things and so on. So I'm asking for a friend who said that wants to become, that friend is me, who said that wants to become the 100 years old programmer, let's say. So in your opinion, how to stay in this game for a long time? What are the good bets?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is you need to love learning. If you don't love learning, you are not going to make it very long as a software engineer because things change too quickly. And it's always up to you to keep up to speed with new technology, new tools, new programming languages, and to get up to speed quickly. So your ability to learn, your ability to teach yourself is really what's going to let you have a job for a long time. Because when I first started working, I was making things work in Internet Explorer 4 and Netscape 4. Right? Like that was what I was working with every day. And there were no real debugging tools. I mean, console.log didn't even exist at that point. We had to use alerts to debug things. There weren't a lot of documentation. We didn't really know what was going on inside the browser. The companies weren't really telling us any of that. And if I had defined my career as like, I'm the guy who's good at making stuff work in IE4 and Netscape 4, I wouldn't have a job anymore because things changed. Um, and I mean, at the same time, the company I was working at, we were using ASP, like not ASP.NET, original ASP, as the language for the backend. And then we started transitioning to JSP. I think it was maybe Tomcat or WebSphere at the time.
The Java days.
Yeah, and these are all things that I mean, I don't think I've used in 15 years at this point. And needing to be able to learn. I mean, we used at my first company, we used Visual Source Safe as source control, which if nobody has ever used that, the basic idea was if you're going to work on a file, you have to check out that file, and then nobody else could make any changes to it until you checked it back in. So it was a system of locking checkouts. And so like you might be working on something and need to make a change to a file. And then like, oh, somebody has that file checked out. And you'd be like, hey, when are you going to be on with that file? Like, oh, I'm not going to be done for a long time. But yet, we still ship software doing that. So like the tools that you use are going to change over the lifetime of your career. The technologies that you use are going to change. And that's why I also tell people a lot, like, don't get your ego wrapped up in what you're doing right now, because what you're doing right now is not going to be what you're going to be doing in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. No, it's not worth defining yourself as a jQuery developer or a React developer or anything like that. Like those are tools and technologies that will come and go, but you still need to be able to stick around and you still need to adapt. That's not to say it doesn't pay to become an expert at something. It does for a certain period of time. But you can't get so dug in with the things that you're working on that you're not willing to explore and try other things and also become an expert in other things. Like early on, I was an expert in Visual Basic. Like I could do anything with Visual Basic in a desktop application. And I haven't done desktop application development now in 20 years. So I'm not an expert in that anymore, and that's okay. I don't have to be anymore. Similarly, the IDEs that you use, anything that's part of your day-to-day job, you have to be willing to let go of and to learn something else and to not get so wrapped up in, well, I'm the person who does this way. Well, that is going to limit you, especially now, because there will be fewer software engineering jobs going forward because of AI. And that means that you're going to have more competition for the job that you want going forward. And that means you need to be more adaptable. You need to be able to change with the way that things are going if you want to continue to work. So, need to love learning, really need to stay curious about different things, even if you're not going to use them immediately. Like maybe you just go off to a conference for a couple of days for some technology that you have no idea if it can help you or not, but you go and learn about it. Or maybe you read a book, or maybe you take a course.
Yep.
And you don't have to become an expert in everything, but having an idea of what's out there will help you, because you never know, down the road, you might be like, oh yeah, that book I read 2 years ago mentioned this, and now I actually need it. And you know where to go to get that help. And I think the last thing is about burnout.
Oh yeah.
It is so important to take time off. So important. And when I say take time off, I don't mean you take a week off from work and during that week you're hacking on some side project. Right? Like that is not time off. That is still programming. That's still using the same portion of your brain that's tired. And I like to think of it like a muscle.
Yep.
Right? Is that like if your arm is tired, then changing to a different arm exercise does not relax that muscle. It doesn't allow that muscle to recover. So when you're taking time away, you need to be doing something not related to programming. And whatever that happens to be for you, that maybe that is like, I have friends who are musicians, and when they take time off from coding, like they're fiddle around with the guitar or with the piano and just spending time doing that, or reading non-technical books. Right? Like you have to let that part of your brain turn off for a little bit to get recharged. For some people, just doing some chores around the house, like, oh, I always wanted to get that wall painted, or I wanted to get a new bookshelf over there. Like I personally, when I'm able, I like to do physical, like non-digital things. And sometimes that is just, sweeping my back deck. It's just being outside, getting things organized, cooking. I enjoy cooking, looking up new recipes, trying that. Not everybody can always like go to a beach for a week, but highly recommend it if you can.
That's why we
Yes.
went to Spain.
Yeah. Well, I mean, at one point I was feeling really burned out when I was working at Yahoo, and I just went to Hawaii for 3 weeks. And I didn't bring a computer with me. I brought a stack of books, and yeah, I hung out on the beach until I got bored of hanging out on the beach. And then I started in doing, touristy stuff, going for tours and stuff like that. And by the time I got back, I was just felt fully refreshed because I was so far away from even thinking about computers, thinking about programming. Um, and it's just really important to get into that habit of taking time off, and away from the computer and scheduling it on your calendar ahead of time. Because, I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone of getting so interested in something I'm working on to just forget to take time off. I was the guy who was famous for, in the United States, we have a lot of days off on Mondays, a lot of Monday holidays. Like, I was the guy who was famous to like showing up to work on those Monday holidays, not realizing that we had the day off because I was so engrossed with what I was working on. But like, make sure you put those on your calendar. If you get 2 weeks paid leave every year, like figure out at the beginning of the year when you're going to take those. If you get more, figure out when you're going to take them. Just put them on your calendar so you don't forget. Like, you don't actually win any prizes for not taking time off. You are way more effective and way more productive when your brain gets time to rest.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Somehow directly related to all of this fantastic advice, I know that you are also offering some coaching services, and this can be found on humanwhocodes.com/coaching. I will link this directly in the notes of the podcast. But tell us a bit more about coaching as a software developer, let's say. So how does it work? What are the benefits? How did you ended up with this idea of coaching people?
So when I was working full time, I was doing a lot of mentoring with less experienced engineers, and it was something that I really enjoyed. I considered it an important part of my job, and helping other people grow and develop and figuring out not just how to do things technically, but just how to be effective as a software engineer, just felt really good. And for me, I was really lucky to have some great mentors when I was at Yahoo. And I was in that transition point of going from like senior engineer to tech lead and to staff engineer to principal engineer, and figuring out, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean to be a tech lead? What does it mean to be a staff engineer? And what one of my mentors told me, it's like, look, when you get to this point in your career, everybody knows that you can write code. Like, you wouldn't have gotten here if you couldn't write code. And that starts to matter less. And what starts to matter more is how you work with people. Like, can you lead people? Can you get things done, coordinate with people, work cross-functionally, work with different teams, work on larger projects, get everybody organized? Like, those are the things that determine whether somebody stays a senior software engineer or continues to be promoted after that. And like, what had prompted that was I had noticed, I was a senior software engineer, and I had at that time like 6-7 years of experience. But there were also people who were senior software engineers who were like 40 years old. And I always wondered what happened, right? Like, why did they not progress after that? So this was a really big eye-opening conversation to me. Like, okay, once you get to a certain point in your career as a software engineer, just delivering code is not enough. Like, it's enough to stay at that level. But if you want to continue to progress, staff engineer, principal engineer, maybe CTO someday, you have to be able to learn these other more soft skills or people skills in order to get ahead. And unfortunately, for a lot of software engineers, they just don't get that sort of guidance and that sort of mentorship as they're progressing in their careers, and they tend to get stuck or they get frustrated, and they don't know where to turn. Because I always like to point out that when people become managers at companies, they almost always go through some type of manager orientation or manager training or something like that to help prepare them for what it's like to be a manager. But when you become a tech lead for the first time, you usually don't get anything. It's like, hey, congratulations, you're a tech lead, like go do the job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what I wanted to do was provide a service where I could help people in that position to figure out, like, how can you be a leader? How can you start interacting more productively with your manager, your director, your VP, working cross-functionally, and doing all of those things outside of the coding that you need to do in order to be successful in your career. Because so many people are not getting that guidance at their company, whether that's because it's a small company and they just don't have anybody to provide that guidance, or it's a startup and the really experienced people are way too busy to sit down and really mentor you, or there's just nobody available because you're at a big company, and in order to find somebody with that type of experience, it would be in a different division, and like don't really have the time to coordinate that. There are a lot of people who get stuck at this level. So what I'm working with people on is not the technical skills. I'm not teaching you how to program. I'm not teaching you how to be an architect. What I'm teaching you is how to be a technical leader so you can be effective in those higher levels of the individual contributor track, where the higher you go, like you have fewer and fewer people to lean on to help you figure out how to do your job effectively.
I see. Nice. I think you can find all the details on the link. So again, it's humanwhocodes.com/coaching. Nicholas, we are a bit over time. I would want to ask you if it's possible to ask you two more questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Super. Just 1 second, please, to open up the window. It's getting it's south of Spain. It's getting very hot during the summer. One of the things I'm very interested about all of my guests is how do you learn? And also, what are you learning these days? So first of all, how do you learn in general? And also, what are you interests these days?
So the primary way I find things to learn is through social media. I'm still pretty active on social media, mostly as a consumer. Although I do post maybe a few times a week. Sometimes if I'm working on something interesting, a couple times a day. But I'm primarily a consumer of social media. And I try to follow people who are posting about a lot of different topics. So like I've never been one of those people who figured out how to follow like 1,000 people on social media. It's just too much noise. So I try to follow people who post about a lot of different topics.
Recently, sorry for the interruption. Recently, I started to be a very heavy user of Twitter lists. So I have actually 3 lists, one on AI, one on JavaScript, and one in general. And I only follow just those lists.
Yeah, so I just have my main feed. That's all that I have. because I also, for my own sanity, don't want to spend a lot of time on social media.
Mhm.
So I basically give myself 15 minutes in the morning to go through everything. And then like 15 minutes in the evening to go through everything. And that's pretty much it. And then if you see me posting during the day, it's all through Claude Desktop and Crosspost. And I'm not actually opening up those apps at that point in time. But I use that to see what I might be interested in when there are links to articles or videos. I save those for later. And later on in the day or later on in the week, I go and review the links that I've saved, read those or watch the videos, see what I can learn, and then see if I want to jump off from there. Because I'm still a big fan of physical books.
Mhm.
So if there's a topic I really want to know deeply, I'm usually going to go look for a physical book on it. Of course, that's really hard with AI because that changes so quickly. But anything related to like leadership or different architecture approaches, that sort of stuff, definitely go and find a book. I am a fan of YouTube. Uh, Following up on things I want to learn on YouTube pretty consistently because that like 10 to 15 minute format of demoing different things works really well for me. So any technology I want to learn, just jump onto YouTube, type it in, and see if I can find a nice intro video that doesn't take too long.
Yeah.
That's those are the primary ways that I'm continuing to learn.
Speaking of YouTube, I found now I now have a Chrome extension because it's so distracting. So many times I went to YouTube on the main page to search for something and I got distracted by a thumbnail and went completely. So again, tools like Crosspost are so welcomed in this space because social media is fantastic, but also very I don't know, attention grabbing. So yeah, it's so what are your main interests these days in what are you learning the most about?
Yeah. So I think like everybody else, I'm learning the most about AI,
Mhm.
just trying to figure out how to leverage it more, how to be more effective using it, and trying to think about what software jobs are going to look like in like 5 years. Spend a lot of time thinking about that and trying to figure out how to be ready for that. Because again, there's going to be fewer jobs in the future. So you're going to have to know how to use these tools effectively if you're going to continue to be working for a long time now. So yeah, primarily AI. I mean, I don't dig too deeply into how it works because quite frankly, I don't really care. I'm not interested in working on a model directly. I'm much more interested in working with models to
Mhm.
figure out what I can do with them. Like, ESLint still takes a lot of time to maintain. How can I use AI to make that easier? How can I automate some of what goes on there? Um, how can I automate just things that I'm doing when I write blog posts? Like, can I use AI to make that better somehow? Like, I'm not using AI to write my blog posts, but I am experimenting with using it for editing it in certain ways to have a certain tone or to be clearer, more concise, that sort of thing.
If I may add something to this, I found very useful. There is a tool, Mac Whisper, or also Whisper Flow, where you can actually dictate to your words, like express your article in words. And I found it that writing a blog post takes much more, especially if it's not with code. It's much more faster if you dictate and after that just ask a model, like, look, write an article and use these words.
Yeah. So I think that's great if your goal is to get something out quickly.
Mhm.
I would challenge you
Mhm.
still spend time writing
Oh yeah.
because writing is how we make sense of what's in our brain.
Yeah.
And like I personally worry that we're going to lose that.
Actually, I've started quite recently. Elements of Style is a book exactly about how to write. Because the fun part, fun fact, it was very hard for me sometimes to express in a prompt what I want the model to do. So it's somehow counterintuitive, the fact that using AI actually led me to try to become a better writer because, yeah.
Yeah, it's I mean the reason I started writing was, well, primarily because I was afraid I was gonna forget what I had just learned.
Mhm.
And in the process of that, starting to figure out if I actually understood what it was that I learned. Because it's one thing to be able to do something, but to be able to describe it to someone else, you really have to understand it very deeply. And that's why still to this day, I write whenever I can, whether it's short technical posts or longer posts, because it helps me to organize my thoughts enough that I can feel confident that I know what I'm talking about. And so on my blog, I decided that I'm always going to write every one of my posts, and then I'm going to use AI to edit it. But I'm never going to use AI to write a post based on some topic. Where I will do that, and where I think that that's very helpful, is in documenting things. I found it very helpful on some of my side projects to just say to the model, like, after you've implemented this, like, okay, write the API documentation for it.
Exactly.
Like that's been super helpful. So I love doing it for that. For personal writing, I'm still going to be writing myself. And I'll also recommend, like, Elements of Style is a great book.
Yeah.
There's also a book called Bird by Bird.
And also on writing well. I don't
Yeah.
remember the author name, but on writing well. Really.
Yeah. I mean, those are the three I usually recommend to people. Elements of Style, On Writing Well, and Bird by Bird are all excellent to help you become better writers, because I do think that as more and more people kind of offload their writing to AIs, the ability to write well as a human is actually going to become more valuable, not less valuable, because there'll be fewer people who are capable of doing it.
Correct. And also, I may add, sometimes just keep a journal. It really helps because you realize you have this how clumsy you are in expressing what's in your head. If you just have to write a journal, I don't know, about how was your day, or I don't know, something interesting, something just to remember in the future. You realize how clumsy you are, as putting everything together.
Yeah, and when you do that too, it's helpful to handwrite it rather than type, because it actually forms a deeper connection with your brain as you're trying to put stuff out there. And another challenge that I'll have for you, since you obviously love writing, is to try writing with your non-dominant hand.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, it is challenging, but I took this challenge several years ago of just write, and I would just write for like 5 minutes every day with my left hand.
Okay.
And at first, it was physically exhausting. Like I would start sweating because you're using muscles that you don't really use that much, and your brain is like, what is going on? I never have had to control this appendage like this before, and it's really struggling to figure it out. But if you keep at it over the course of a couple of weeks, eventually your brain figures out what you're trying to do, and your letters become clearer. And it is actually a creative writing exercise to write with your non-dominant hand, because it accesses the opposite side of your brain that you typically are using during the day.
Wow, okay, this is new. Oh, okay.
So yeah, it's a very interesting experience. It is very frustrating to start, but it's just like riding a bike. It's like if you stick with it, eventually your brain figures it out. And then it's really fun and interesting.
Wow, I will try it out. Thanks for the. I will literally try it out. Super. Thank you very much. Was if I would had I don't know ask you 2 more hours of questions, but maybe we'll have a second episode sometimes in the near future. Was a real pleasure. Um, Finally, where would you send people to follow you online and yeah, where they can find more about you?
My website is humanwhocodes.com. All my socials are on there, but on Twitter, I'm Slicknet. On Mastodon, I'm nzakis at fostodon.org. And on Blue Sky, I'm humanwhocodes.com.
And I would add also for people to subscribe to your newsletter. It's one of the main newsletters, programming newsletters I follow. So and you just send it, I think, once per month, so not too much.
Yeah, try not to overload people.
Exactly, perfect. Nicholas, thank you very much. Was a pleasure, and keep in touch. Thank you for.
Yeah, thank you.